HEQ have released something very, very interesting, and that is this little gimbal that you see here. What's interesting about it is the fact that it is a gimbal for either the DJI O3 system or the CaddX Avatar HD system. It allows you to mount your DJI stroke Avatar camera and have full 3-axis stabilization. It allows for various inputs, even allowing for things such as head tracking. And what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of what this gimbal is all about. Now, just to be crystal clear up front, HEQ did send me this gimbal over to take a look at for free. However, they have not paid me to make this video. They've not seen this video before it's been published. And as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. Okay, so to start, let's take a look at what you get in the box. Now, this gimbal is incredibly interesting because it is the first time that I've seen something properly off the shelf designed to take either the DJI O3 camera or the CaddX camera. Now, in the kit, we get the gimbal itself located there, which we'll take a look at in a minute. We have this little bag which contains some wires. We've got some rubber isolators, and then this that fell out at the side there is a mounting plate for your quad itself. Now, as you can see, it is a 3-axis gimbal, very much like you'd have found on the likes of a DJI Phantom 3, Phantom 4, and all of them. But the very unique thing here is that it is designed for your own FPV camera. Now, the version they've sent me is designed for the O3 system. It comes pre-wired with an O3 cable going all the way through for the camera. And this comes out the top here, allowing you to mount this up on your quad. It is also available, though, in a version for Avatar HD with that cable installed. It isn't, though, just about the cable. It is about the tuning parameters for the specific camera as well. But as I've said, the one we've got here is for O3. Now, just looking around it, you've got your main 3-axis gimbal at the bottom. So we've got our yaw, our pitch movement, and then our roll. This is then coupled to the main PCB, which is located at the top, which houses all of the I/O and everything else, which we'll take a closer look at in a minute. There is this removable plate here, which attaches to the camera. There's some screws on the back, which you undo and lift off. And what you then do is mount the front section of the O3 camera to that, and then that mounts into the gimbal. Now, just going over the main specification, weight-wise, they say it comes in at 67 grams. I've actually popped this on my scales, and with this O3 cable, it's coming in about 69. I don't know if their weight did take into account that cable, but what I would say is just under 70 grams as it is here today. Now, it is a 3-axis gimbal, as I've said, and it supports the following angles. So pitch supports -135 to +45, so it'll go all the way down to there, and all the way up to there. It does have a limited movement in the pitch pointing up compared to down. That is going to restrict the ability to use this upside down. So if you want to use it that way, you're absolutely fine. But if you wanted to mount this on top of something, you are going to have a limited amount of movement looking down. So it is worth taking that into account. Your movement is -135 to +135. It isn't limitless. So you can see the limit goes to there. Move it around and the limit goes to there. And then on the roll, it is -45 to +45. Plenty of movement on that one. Now, it does support, as I've said, the DJI O3 camera and the CaddX camera. There isn't to say you couldn't put a different camera on this gimbal. However, they're the two ones that are officially supported at this moment in time. Moving around to the I/O, if we shift around the top, you can see we've got ports located all over the place. If we move around to the side first of all, here we've got our DC input. That supports 12 to 24 volt. Then we've got a USB-C port for updating the firmware and the configuration. Next to that, we've got an S-Bus port, a PWM port, and then there appears to be 2 UART ports, one located here and here. At the point of me making this video, it supports S-Bus, PWM, and Mavlink input, although my belief is Mavlink isn't working at this time. It has the UARTs, but it is something that is going to be coming in a future firmware update. Now, with regards to its overall dimensions, it is 67.5, they say, from top to bottom, 49.5 from front to back, and then 48.5 width. And then this top plate down here is 43, I think it is. Yeah, 43 mil corner to corner. So that way you're going to be able to mount it onto your quad as long as you've got a base plate of something within that size down there. Now, whilst I said mounting this to a quad, I can see there also being some plane users interested in this, although that upside down gimbal pitch limitation may not make it ideal. But what you do have here is the option of your mounting points around here, and then you simply have your rubber isolators that go between there and there. You install that then like that, and that's going to offer the vibration isolation almost identical to what we've seen on the original DJI Phantom 3. Now, obviously, the first task in using this is going to be mounting our camera. So what we're going to do is just undo these 4 screws down here. They are very small, so do be careful when you remove them. I'm just going to place them there nice and safe on that top carbon plate. And then I'm just going to flip that up there so I can get into those 2. And then what this should do is carefully release that plate. There we go. You can see it started to move. So what you want to do is just very carefully lift that up, and then that removes this plate. This is what you mount your O3 camera straight to. So to install the camera is fairly straightforward. What we need to keep is just the camera piece itself. Earlier, I may have mentioned just the front half, but I was wrong when I said that. You actually need the whole bit, but what we do need to do is get the cable off it. So taking the O3 camera apart is very simple and straightforward. You just undo these 2 screws on the side. This camera has been taken apart many, many times, so this one is going to be fairly easy. This is the one I actually replaced the lens on, if you have or haven't seen that video. So what we're going to do there is pop that off. I'm going to very carefully release that connector off the back of the camera. But what we now need to do is actually recover this back shell. That isn't as easy as it sounds, but what we're actually going to need to do is pop out this little rubber grommet that holds it all in place. There is some glue down in that back shell area there as well. I actually think I've got a spare one of these somewhere, which I need to check because I did a O3 Lite kit where I stripped it down, but I will show you how to do it on this one. It involves breaking the glue that is located down in here. So you will find that there's some glue there. This can be a little bit easier if you add some heat. I'm not going to do that here today, but if you do add some heat to this with a heat gun, it will actually soften the glue up. But you can there see that once you've got in there, you can peel it up and that comes forward. So you want to get that glue off. We don't need that anymore. Then that just leaves this little rubber grommet at the back here. And what we're just going to do is pop that out. There we go. And then very carefully pop through our old O3 cable and connector, just like that. Okay, so what we then need to do is take our back shell. I'm just going to pop that there a minute, because what we actually need to do is get this cable to come through this back shell, like that. We're going to pop that in there, and then we're going to pop that through like that and pop that out of the way. We then need to mount that connector on the back of the camera. That isn't particularly hard, but there isn't a lot of cable here to play with. You do need to be a little bit careful. So we're just going to align that in like that and give it a push, trying not to get any of that thermal compound all over my fingers. There we go. You can see that that's now mounted. I'm just going to put a bit of pressure on each corner there just to make sure that is on. There we go. Then I'm just going to carefully pop that in like that and then pop the camera back together. We can then put our screws back in. That's the one that's going to hold it in place. Here we are. Pop that one in that side there. And then we need to mount the camera itself to that back plate that they included. We're just going to need to make sure that our cable does come out and pops up there. It is a little bit tight where that cable is, but it will go. I don't think it's any different one way versus the other. Let's just check. Actually, yeah, it seems to go better one way than it does the other, so you can then see that that lines up. Now, they have included some screws in the kit with this, so let me just go into there and get them out. There we are. hopefully these are the screws to do this bit with. I'm just going to grab one of them. Little bit of a fiddly task, not terrible. There we go. Yep. Just want 4 of these. You want to make sure that you do put all 4 in, because this gimbal will be balanced based on the fact of having these screws in place. And whilst you might think, oh, well, 1 screw isn't going to make a difference, you would be surprised on a gimbal the difference just 1 little item can make with regards to making sure that it is performing exactly as it's expected. Gimbal balancing is a particularly complex task at the best of times, and many of these gimbals are quite sensitive. There we go. That is the camera fitted like that. So then we simply need to pop that back in place like that there, and then we can pop our screws back in. So grabbing the first one, line it up on the screwdriver first would help. It's always a bit of a challenge. You do want to make sure that when you do this, you do get it the right way around. You don't want it upside down. Although you can change that in the O3 system if you needed to, but the preference would be to get it the right way round first of all. There we go. Flip that way. It really is fairly straightforward to do if you've done any work on a DJI O3 camera. There's nothing particularly difficult here. There we go, sorted. So now you can see the O3 camera is installed. It's mounted directly in the gimbal. Fairly straightforward. There you go, you can see it sticks out from the front. Looks really good, actually. I have to say, it is a very professional looking solution, this. So next task is going to be obviously getting the gimbal mounted onto the aircraft and then connecting this into an O3 air unit. Okay, now just to demonstrate this on the bench before we connect it to an aircraft. Now what I'm going to do is power it up. I've got a second camera to show you it actually in action because it's not going to be easy to demo on the overhead. So what I'm going to do is just get that there and hold it in place there while I move over and power up the gimbal. Swap hands, and hopefully on the second camera, let me just make sure I get it in view, you should see it there kick in. There you can see the gimbal is on. And if I now just demonstrate its capability, so if we do pitch movement first, you can see there that it is stabilizing the pitch. The camera is staying straight and level even though the gimbal's moving. If I do the same with roll, if I roll the gimbal, it's quite hard to do this one-handed. If I roll it, you can see it is stabilizing that as well. The only axis that is not stabilized is yaw. There is a dampening on the yaw. So if I move it fast, you can see that it does smooth out the movement. It's the pitch and roll that it is stabilizing as standard. Now, there is a new FPV mode available on this, which we'll talk about later on, that literally has just released, and that's going to allow some other functionality, and we'll take a look at that towards the end of the video. Okay, now I've mounted this gimbal to this aircraft. This is one of the Holybro test kits I was sent. It is the X500 version 2. I actually have a video about this on the channel. Now, you could mount this gimbal to any based aircraft. It depends really what you want to do. You can put it on Ardra PX4, iNav, Betaflight. There's nothing specific about the gimbal that's going to stop you doing that. Really, it just comes down to the platform. I use Cube Autopilot an awful lot on this channel. The only reason I haven't put it on one of the Cube builds today is that this build has this separate plate pre-installed up front. That's absolutely perfect for the gimbal to mount to down here. And I've simply held it in place with some sticky adhesive pads, but I have put some cable ties through that plate loosely just to have a bit of an extra bit of safety just in case the adhesive comes loose. Now, the wiring on this is fairly straightforward. So the camera is connected. We've then got the cable coming out the back for the air unit. I've simply stuck the O3 air unit down in there. You can just see it down there, and the antenna is sticking out down here somewhere. Not important. This isn't going to be a long range build. It's just somewhere that I can get to it. Now, I haven't connected the O3 air unit on this to this flight controller. This is running PX4. I don't know if PX4 supports the DJI O3 FPV system at this moment in time. In this video, I'm not particularly bothered about that fact. For instance, I know ArduPilot absolutely does support the DJI system, so you get full telemetry and everything through your OSD if you wanted that. I'm not really worried about that today. This is about the gimbal. What we have done though is connected at power, so that is what you can see there on the side. That is heading up to a spare DC output that I've got down there, and then we simply have PWM connection, which is these wires you can see moving there that go up into there. That's going to give me manual pitch and yaw control of the gimbal. We'll take a look at that a bit more when we get out into the field with it. What I'm not doing though is connecting to the flight controller for telemetry, and there's no connection with regards to the gimbal and counteracting with the flight controller in this. The gimbal is going to behave completely independent, and what it's going to try and do is stabilize that O3 footage. Now, the software is called HEQ G-Port. Now, the version I'm showing you here is version 1.0.0C. This is the latest version at the point of me recording this video. And in fact, it just released and has a new feature called FPV mode, which we'll take a look at in a minute. Now, to connect to the gimbal, once you've got the USB port in, you should then see it appear on your COM list. For me, it's COM26, so I'm going to simply select that. I'm going to leave baud rate and language as it is, and then click open. Now, there really isn't much of an indication to say it's open other than it says now close. The simplest thing to do to check that you are connected is go down to the firmware upgrade box down here, click query version, and this then will give you some information about what firmware is installed on the gimbal, and if you're connected correctly, that will show up just like you see there. Now, all of the options on the gimbal are split up into these little boxes. If we start in the top left, you can see we've got calibration. Now, I'm not going to go through that in this video, but this is the option of calibrating the gimbal, so if you are having issues with the stability, this is something that you should do. You've then got the two channel input windows. You've got S-Bus channel settings as well as PWM channel settings. Now, at the moment, I haven't actually reading what settings are on the gimbal, so the first thing you need to do here is click read, and you'll then see that all of these options have updated, and that is because it's pulled in the settings that are already on the gimbal. I'm not using S-Bus, so all of that is disabled, but if you jump over to PWM, you can see for me that it is set to PWM 1, 2 and 3 for pitch, yaw and home. Pitch and yaw is obviously the input settings for pitch and yaw. Home is the ability to home the gimbal, basically bring it straight and forward via an input as well. Then below this, you've got the mode, and you've got two options here. You have speed and angle mode. This is simply the mode the input PWM will react like. So for instance, it's basically rate mode or angle mode. So rate mode will move at a specific speed depending on the position of the input, whereas angle mode will move based on a specific position of the input rather than speed. Rate mode versus angle mode like you would have on your normal drone. The next thing we then have over here is a new window called Gimbal Config. Now, this allows us to set the mode of the gimbal. When you get it as standard, you will find it will be in yaw. This means that the yaw of the gimbal will follow the aircraft, but the pitch and roll will allow it to move to try and stabilize the footage. But you now have the option of selecting what you want it to do. You've now got a new yaw and roll mode, or yaw, roll and pitch mode. Yaw, roll and pitch is going to be very handy for, say, wing and FPV plane users, because they can tell the gimbal to follow the movement of the aircraft in all axis, but you then would still have the ability to control the gimbal almost like having it on a head tracker to look around without it stabilizing the footage as it would in normal angle mode. And I will try and demonstrate the difference between this and this one specifically later on. When you have changed the settings on these, what you would need to do is read them in first, change to the setting you want, click write, and down here it'll tell you if the mode has been written successfully. Then we've simply got the option for the camera position. So whether you've got it upward or downward, that is either if you've got it on top of something like in a plane with it being mounted in the cockpit looking up, or underneath a quad like I've got it set on mine. And the final box over here is the firmware upgrade box, and that is simply a process of selecting the file you want, click start upgrade, and allow it to complete. Now, just to quickly demonstrate this gimbal is working, what I've done is connected it all up to my radio. I do have it in that rate mode or speed mode. So for instance, I've got this right hand knob set to the pitch. So if I move it that way, you can see it adjusts the gimbal up. If I turn it that way, it'll adjust the gimbal down. And if I want to stop it, I just move it back to the center. If you put it in position mode, what it would do is follow the position of the knob and not act like rate mode like it is here. But you can see there that we're able to move the gimbal up and down, no problems at all. And then if I look at this knob here, you can then see I've set it to yaw the gimbal as well. So again, exactly the same in rate control mode, allowing me to move it up, down, left and right. Center it there. There we go. Now, just to show you the maximum up tilt that you will get on this, if I just show it going down, you can see you can just basically look beyond straight down. But if we then go to up the other way, you can see there, that is the maximum up angle that you can get. If I just tilt it to the side there, you can see that's the maximum that we've got. It won't go any higher in that. And that's just going to offer a little bit of a restriction when it comes to mounting this gimbal upside down, because you're not going to have the ability to look down as far as you can currently when it's in this configuration. Okay, now just to demonstrate this FPV mode. Now the weather here is not going to allow me to show you this in flight, but I am going to demonstrate it here on the bench. Now I've currently got it set up in the normal mode, and as I've showed you earlier, here it does the normal stabilization. So if I tilt it forward and back, you can see the pitch is stabilizing. And then if we do the roll, you can see that is stabilizing as well. The only thing that isn't stabilizing is that yaw movement, which is getting a little bit of a buffer, but it's not allowing the gimbal to move. Now, to enable the FPV mode, you need to set the switch on the remote to that option to center the gimbal. And when you've enabled the FPV mode, it'll kick it into it. So once you've done that, you will then see that when moving it around, it no longer stabilizes like it was earlier. The camera now follows the movement of the aircraft, and it's offering just a little bit of a buffer stabilization like you would get in the normal yaw mode. This is going to be ideal for people who want to use it on things like fixed wing, use it in a situation where maybe you have it on something with like a head tracker, allowing you to look around, but the gimbal would then still follow the position of the drone. You can, though, turn that back on and off in flight. That's the nice thing about it. You're not limited, so you can simply set it on a switch, change it back, and then go back into the normal stabilizing mode if you want to, or switch it between the two, again allowing you to have the choice of which is best for your use. I'm going to do some more testing with this in some different environments, and that's something I'll touch on a little bit more later on in the future. Now, just to make sure it was working correctly out in the field, we did some tests. This is the normal gimbal mode. It is only stabilizing yaw. You're going to have full movement on pitch and roll. What we're going to do is test it with rock steady turned off first of all, then with rock steady turned on, just to show you how it looks. And we're going to test it in some stabilized modes as well as angle mode, just pushing it a bit harder just to see how well it does hold up. You will see in some of this footage some flaring from the sun. That's nothing to do with the gimbal, that's just usual lens flaring that you will get on the DJI O3 camera. There are times where you will see in the footage some vibrations make it through. That again is down to the mounting as well, depending on how many vibrations your aircraft is going to have. At the end of the day, the gimbal is designed to try and smooth out movement, not necessarily remove heavy vibrations. That again may take some work depending on your specific setup. Now, this is a bit of footage I took down one of the local beaches. Well, beach is a loose term for this, but it's a local area. And it was ridiculously windy. It's a flight that I actually abandoned because I started out and there was a huge amount of wind coming up the valley and it was knocking the aircraft all over the place. Now, in the FPV view, it actually looked horrific. However, looking back at the footage recorded, it wasn't that bad. Now, it is a combination between the gyro stabilized footage on the gimbal as well as rock steady, but it didn't come out too bad. But what I will say is any movement you see in this, especially your movement, is a result of the wind gusts coming down the valley, but I thought I'd leave it in because it came out much better than I initially anticipated. Now, price-wise, the gimbal is available from HEQ for $149. For that, you can get either the 03 version or the Avatar HD. I have had some questions about if you could use this with HDZero, and technically, I see no reason why you couldn't, although you would have to tear the gimbal down to change the cable. HEQ did mention to me about some specific tuning parameters on the gimbals, but I don't know if it's different between the cameras. What I would say is, if you were buying this to use with the likes of HDZero, I would get the Avatar HD version because the camera size on that is a lot closer to the camera size on HDZero, whereas the 03 camera is much larger. Going for the 19mm fitment is definitely going to be the best option, and I don't see there being too many issues installing the HDZero camera if you wanted to, although it would mean stripping the gimbal down to swap the cable. Overall, now I have to say I've got no major complaints with this gimbal at all. In the testing that I've done with it, it's worked exactly as expected. Gimbals are complicated devices, but what I will say is in my testing, pushing it to the max in yaw and things like that, it did a good job of stabilizing the footage, much better than things like the old DJI Phantom 3. For those of you who've been around a long time, you will know what the gimbal was like on that, and this is much better than that. It seemed to perform absolutely brilliantly. I haven't tested the FPV mode in flight at the point of me recording this video, but it is nice to see. There is some tuning options there. About the only thing I would personally like to see on this gimbal a bit more is more manual control options in the software, but HEQ are doing regular updates, so hopefully we could see more around that in the future. Now, as I've said, if you're interested in getting one, there will be a link to it in the description. $149. I think it's actually good value if you want a gimbal for your system. And what's really interesting is the fact that you can turn the DJI 03 system into quite a good stabilized camera system as well, and this is the first time that we've been able to do that. Obviously, it's there for Avatar HD as well if you want it. You could use it with Moonlight if you wanted to as well, and it's going to be interesting to see the use case people have for it, mounting it onto planes. As I said, head tracking is definitely an option here. It's not something I've covered in this video, but you will definitely be able to do it as long as you've got the ability to put PWM inputs or S-Bus inputs from your flight controller or your receiver output from your headset into this gimbal, and it's going to follow. Now, I'm really interested in knowing what you think. I'd like to say a big thank you to HEQ for sending this over. As I've said, if you're interested in getting one, there will be a link below. And finally, I'd just like to say if there's any questions, please do put them down below. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this, please also consider checking out the link to my Patreon, as well as buy me a coffee in the description. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my patrons. We would not be able to keep making content on this channel without your support. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content in the future, please do consider checking it out. Anyway, that's it from me on this one. Stay safe. I will speak to you soon.